Mungkinkah Matius ingat semua perkataan Yesus 50 tahun setelahnya? Debat seru Kristen vs. kritikus.
I'll offer 6 criteria of reliability that provide confidence in the historical reliability of the Gospels. The second criterion is the author used good judgment in his choice of sources. At least half of today's critical New Testament scholars agree with the early church tradition that Mark's primary source was Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples. A majority of critical scholars agree that the primary sources for the Gospel of Luke and its sequel, the book of Acts, included Mark's Gospel, people more directly acquainted with Jesus, an early source scholars call Q, short for the German word Quelle, meaning source, and Paul, with whom many believe he had traveled. A majority of critical scholars also agree that John's Gospel was written either by an eyewitness or that an eyewitness was the author's primary source for much of the information in that Gospel. So contrary to what the old form critics claimed, the Gospels are not a compilation of stories known by the Gospel authors only after those stories had been passed around carelessly, word of mouth, by a vast number of unknown individuals over the course of 4 decades or even longer. For at minimum, the Gospels of Mark, Luke, and John are based on excellent sources who were either eyewitnesses or those not far removed from them.
The most famous part of Jesus' teaching is the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. It is 3 chapters of Jesus talking. Matthew's gospel was probably written in the 80s of the Common Era. That is, it sounds like that's the dating that Mike is going with when he said the Gospels were written between 40 and 65 years later. So probably 50, 55 years later is when Matthew's written. Matthew's writing a sermon that Jesus gave on this mount. He's writing this account 50 years after the sermon was given. How well can you remember Barack Obama's last State of the Union address from 2 years ago? Could you write it down? Now, Mike has just told us that the way the gospel writers knew what was said is because Jesus said these things over and over and over and over. I'm not going to say how many overs that is because I don't have enough time, but that over and over again. You will notice that he never pointed out whether that is ever said in the New Testament. Where in the New Testament does it ever say that Jesus gave the same sermon over and over and over and over and over and over again? It doesn't say anywhere. Where does he give the same speech over and over again in the New Testament? He never gives the same speech more than once in the New Testament.